Welcome to the deep dive. We all want to get smart on important topics, right? But without feeling totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, finding that balance is key. It's easy to get lost in the details sometimes.
So today, we're cracking open Lithium Process Chemistry. It's edited by Alexandre Chagnes and Jolanta Swiatowska.
And it's a really solid book. We're basically aiming to give you a guided tour through the early parts, focusing on lithium's journey, resources, how we get it.
How it works in batteries and even recycling, the whole life cycle, really.
Exactly. And our plan for this deep dive is to take these first few chapters piece by piece, build up a solid understanding.
Maybe uncover some surprising bits along the way.
Hopefully. There usually are a few aha moments in these.
Okay, let's jump in then. Chapter 1 is titled Global Lithium Resources and Sustainability Issues. This comes from Patrice Christman, Eric Glogwin, Jean-François, forgive my pronunciation, and Beatrice Platon.
Right, and this chapter really lays the groundwork. It looks at the data, the information that shapes our understanding of lithium supply and demand now and looking forward.
And it keeps that sustainability angle in view, which is crucial.
Absolutely. What I found interesting right away is that they emphasize where the data even comes from.
Yeah.
Section 1 talks about that.
Yeah, like how reliable is this info we're basing everything on?
Exactly. In a field moving this fast, good data is everything.
Okay, so Section 2 dives into lithium uses. Now, I think most people listening, like me, immediately jump to batteries.
That's the obvious one now, definitely.
But back in 2013, which is the time frame here, batteries were the biggest chunk, 39%. But ceramics and glass were right behind at 30%.
That's a huge slice. And greases were another 8%. It really shows lithium wasn't just a one-trick pony, even then.
What else did they mention? Air treatment?
Air treatment, yeah. Aluminum production, metallurgy-like, in continuous casting, pharmaceuticals, polymers. Quite a list.
It makes you realize how embedded it was in industry already, beyond just the high-tech stuff we think of now.
And the chapter apparently shows the shift, right? Between 2003 and 2013.
It does. It cracks the relative percentages, and you see that battery slice getting noticeably bigger over that decade.
You can really see the seeds of the current boom being sown in those numbers, that growing demand curve starting to tick upwards.
It's like a snapshot of the market just before the big EV push really took off.
Totally. Hindsight makes it look obvious, but it shows how market shares can evolve pretty quickly.
So from uses, it logically moves to lithium supply. Section 3. This is where we get the production number.
Table 1.2 lays it out, country by country, for that same period, 2003 to 2013.
We see the U.S., Chile, Argentina, Australia, China, the players we still talk about today. What jumps out from that historical data?
Well, you see some countries really ramping up production during that time. Australia, for example, comes on strong.
Yeah, and maybe others staying relatively flat or even decreasing slightly.
Right. It reflects, new discoveries coming online, investment decisions, maybe different extraction technologies becoming viable in certain places.
Chile and Argentina with their brines, Australia with hard rock. The different sources start to shape the global picture.
Understanding those shifts back then gives you context for the supply chain discussions we're having right now, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, so the chapter wraps up with conclusions. Multiple factors will drive the future availability of lithium.
And here they look ahead, mentioning forecasts for lithium carbonate and hydroxide growth, I think from 2011 to 2025.
Yeah, the CKGR forecasts. And unsurprisingly, they expected strong growth, heavily driven by batteries.
Any specific battery types mentioned?
Yes, they specifically call out lithium iron phosphate LFP cathodes, saying lithium was the preferred material choice there.
Wow, so they were flagging LFP's importance even back then. That chemistry has really taken off in certain sectors, like some EVs and energy storage.
It shows they had a good handle on the emerging trends. Okay, so that's chapter 1, a good overview of the landscape.
Definitely. Resources, uses, supply, early forecasts. Sets the stage nicely.
Now, chapter 2 gets a bit more technical, fundamentals in electrochemistry and hydrometallurgy.
Right, this is the how it works chapter, both for batteries and for getting the lithium out. The underlying science.
So part 1 is fundamentals in lithium-ion batteries, the real basics of how they store and release energy.
Yeah, the movement of those lithium ions, the role of the anode, cathode, electrolyte, all that good stuff.
It's all about ions moving back and forth during charge and discharge, right? This section probably breaks down those reactions.
Exactly, and how the electrolyte acts as the pathway and the separator keeps things from shorting out.
Okay, subsection 1.1. Thermodynamics of lithium intercalation in host structures. Intercalation. Sounds fancy.
It does. but it just means how the lithium ions sort of fit themselves into the structure of the electrode material, like parking cars in specific spots in a garage.
And thermodynamics is about the energy involved in that parking process.
Pretty much. How much energy it takes to put them in, how much you get back when they come out. It's key for efficiency and how long the battery lasts. You want stable parking spots.
Got it. Then 1.2 is thermodynamics of surfaces and interfaces, so where different parts of the battery touch each other.
Exactly. Like where the electrode meets the electrolyte, these interfaces are super important. Lots of crucial chemistry happens there.
Things like surface energy and wetting. What's wetting in this context?
Wetting is basically how well the liquid electrolyte spreads out and makes contact with the solid electrode surface.
Huh.
You want good wetting, like water soaking into a paper towel,
Yeah.
not beating up like on wax.
Right, because good contact means ions can move easily across that boundary. Poor wetting would hinder performance.
Precisely. It affects efficiency, power, everything.
Okay, then 1.3 is just electrochemistry, focusing on voltammetry. I remember this vaguely. Measuring current versus voltage.
You got it. It's a whole toolkit for studying electrochemical reactions. You apply a voltage, see how much current flows, and figure out what's happening chemically.
And they highlight cyclic voltammetry. What does that involve?
Cyclic voltammetry, or CV, is super common in battery research. You sweep the voltage up and down, back and forth, and measure the current response.
And the example, voltammogram for graphite, probably shows peaks where lithium goes in and comes out.
Exactly. Those peaks tell you about the reactions, how reversible they are, the voltages they happen at. It's like an electrochemical fingerprint.
Then there's linear sweep voltammetry at a rotating disc electrode. That sounds even more specific.
Yeah, the RDE technique. You spin the electrode at a controlled speed. This controls how fast reactants get to the surface, helping you study the reaction speed itself, the kinetics.
Like controlling the flow past the electrode surface?
Right. Takes away some variables.
And finally, chronoamperometry and chronopotentiometry, measuring things over time.
Yep. Chronoamperometry. You step the voltage suddenly and watch how the current changes over time. Chronopotentiometry. You apply a constant current and watch how the voltage changes over time.
So different ways of probing the system to understand how quickly reactions happen and other dynamic properties.
Exactly. All part of the electrochemist's toolkit for characterizing battery materials.
Okay, that covers the battery electrochemistry basics. Then the chapter switches gears to section 2. Fundamentals in hydrometallurgy.
Hydro meaning water, metallurgy meaning metals. So using water-based processes to extract and purify metals. Crucial for lithium production and recycling.
Right, so dissolving lithium ores or brines in water, separating out the lithium and getting it into a pure form.
The basic steps are usually leaching, dissolving the valuable metal, purification, getting rid of the junk, and precipitation or recovery, getting the purified metal compound back out of the solution.
And a key technique mentioned here is thermodynamics of solvent extraction, section 2.1, using organic liquids.
Yeah, SX, solvent extraction. It's a very common hydrometallurgical technique. You use an organic solvent that doesn't mix with your water-based solution, kind of like oil and water.
And this organic solvent is designed to selectively grab the lithium.
Exactly. It has chemicals in it, extractants, that preferentially bind to the lithium ions and pull them out of the water phase into the organic phase. Thermodynamics tells you how well that transfer works.
Things like distribution ratio and extraction efficiency.
Right. Distribution ratio tells you how much the lithium prefers the organic phase over the water phase. Efficiency tells you what percentage you actually manage to extract.
And there are different types of these extractants. First, acidic extractants or cationic exchangers.
These work by swapping ions. They release a positive ion, usually a proton, H+, into the water phase in exchange for pulling a positive metal ion, like La+, into the organic phase.
A cation exchange, okay. Then solvating agents.
These work differently. They don't necessarily swap ions. Instead, the extractant molecule itself directly grabs onto the metal ion, forming a neutral complex that likes being in the organic solvent.
Like giving the lithium ion a non-water-loving coat so it moves into the organic phase?
That's a good way to think about it.
Then brief mentions of basic extractants. I guess they exchange negative ions. And synergistic systems.
Yeah, basic or anionic exchangers swap negative ions. Synergistic systems are cool. You mix two different extractants, and together they work way better than either one alone. Like 1 + 1 = 3 in terms of extraction power.
Interesting. Okay, section 2.2 discusses formulation of solvent extractants. What makes a good one?
Well, you need a few things. High capacity, It needs to hold a lot of lithium. Selectivity needs to grab lithium, but not other unwanted metals like sodium or magnesium, especially from brines.
Kinetics too, right? It
Yeah,
needs to happen reasonably fast.
absolutely. Fast kinetics for efficient processing. And stability, the extractant shouldn't break down easily under the process conditions. Tables 2.1 and 2.2 probably list examples of these chemicals.
And finally, 2.3 mentions mixers, settlers, and columns. This is the industrial hardware.
That's the equipment. Mixers vigorously contact the water and organic phases to let the extraction happen. Settlers allow the two liquids, because they don't mix, to separate by gravity so you can collect them. Columns are another way to do this continuously.
Okay, so that's the fundamental science covered. Now, Chapter 3 gets practical. Lithium production processes by Tom Tran and Van T. Long.
Yeah, this chapter connects the resources from Chapter 1 with the hydrometallurgy and other techniques from Chapter 2 to show how we actually make lithium chemicals.
From minerals and brines. The introduction mentions key steps like thermal treatment, leaching, solar evaporation, precipitation.
A whole sequence of operations, often tailored to the specific starting material.
Section 2 goes into specific lithium production processes. It starts with some historical methods like direct roasting of spodumene with limestone.
Yeah, older methods often involved high temperatures to break down the tough spodumene mineral first, then leaching out the lithium. Maybe not the most efficient or environmentally friendly by today's standards.
Then it mentions sulfate roasting and acid leaching of spodumene. Are these more common now for hard rock?
Those are definitely major routes for spodumene processing today. Sulfate roasting converts the lithium to a soluble sulfate form. Acid leaching uses strong acids to dissolve the lithium directly. Both aim to get the lithium into an aqueous solution.
And then for brines, which we know are a big source, it mentions solar evaporation.
Right, especially in places like South America, the Atacama Desert, huge ponds where the sun does the initial work of evaporating water and concentrating the lithium chloride in the brine.
Seems simple, but I imagine it takes a long time and a lot of space.
It does. Months, even years. And it's climate dependent. After evaporation, you still need further processing, often using techniques like precipitation or solvent extraction to purify the lithium.
Okay. Then Section 3 looks at new project development, referencing some tables, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3. These have real project data.
Seems like it. Experimental results, economic data, things like production rates, capital costs, CapEx, operating costs, APEX for specific projects.
That's super valuable. It lets you compare different approaches, like this new brine process versus that hard rock mine. What are the real costs, the real output?
Exactly. You see the trade-offs. Maybe a project has lower initial CapEx but higher ongoing OpEx, or vice versa. It shows the economics behind lithium supply. Examples mentioned are Salar de Cauchery-Roz, Namaska Lithium, Galaxy Resources.
Gives you a feel for the business side of lithium production.
And the chapter concludes with a summary, likely emphasizing the variety of processes and the ongoing efforts to make them more efficient and sustainable.
Makes sense. The demand pressure is driving innovation there, for sure.
Okay, so we've gone from resource to production. Chapter 4 brings us to the main event for many people. Lithium batteries technologies. For the electrodes to the batteries. Authors are Jolanta, Swiatowska, and Philippe Marboux.
Finally, into the battery itself. This chapter looks at the materials, the components, what actually makes the lithium-ion battery tick.
The intro lays out the 5 key parts we often hear about. Positive electrode, cathode, negative electrode, anode, separator, electrolyte, and a current collector.
Right. The cathode and anode store the lithium. The electrolyte lets the ions move between them. The separator stops shorts. And the current collectors, usually copper foil for the anode and aluminum for the cathode, get the electricity in and out.
Section 2 talks about battery components and electrode limitations. Mentions the electrolyte's electrochemical window and the SEI layer. These sound critical.
They really are. The electrochemical window is the voltage range where the electrolyte is stable. If your electrode operates at too high or too low a voltage, it can decompose the electrolyte, which is bad news for battery life and safety.
Like trying to run an engine outside its proper operating temperature.
Good analogy. And the SEI solid electrolyte interface.
Yeah, that's a thin layer that forms on the anode surface, especially graphite, during the first few charge cycles. It's actually formed by controlled reaction with the electrolyte.
So it uses up a little bit of lithium and electrolyte initially.
It does, which is a downside. But a stable SEI layer is essential. It acts like a protective film, preventing further uncontrolled reactions between the anode and the electrolyte later on. It's crucial for long cycle life. Figure 4.1 probably shows these voltage limits visually.
Okay, interesting trade-off there. Then Section 3. positive electrode cathode materials. This is where we see those acronyms like LCO, LMO, LFP.
Exactly. These are the lithium intercalation compounds that store lithium at the positive side. Figure 4.2 apparently shows crystal structures for LiMo2, layered oxides, Lum2O4, spinels, and Life2O4 olivines.
So different atomic arrangements, how does that affect performance?
Hugely. Layered oxides like LiCoO2, LCO, the original lithium-ion cathode, pack a lot of energy but use expensive, problematic cobalt. Spinels like Lim2O4 LMO have a 3D structure, good for power, cheaper but maybe less stable over time. Olivines like Life2O4 LFP are super stable, safe, long-lasting, use iron, which is cheap and abundant, but have lower voltage and energy density.
So each has its pros and cons. It's all about matching the cathode to the application energy density versus power, versus safety, versus cost, versus lifespan.
Precisely. It's a constant balancing act of materials science. And the chapter mentions other polyanionic compounds too, showing research is ongoing.
Right. Now for the other side, section 4. Negative electrode anode materials. The main one is graphite, right?
Overwhelmingly, yes. Carbonaceous materials, primarily graphite. Figure 4.6 likely shows those graphene layers where the lithium ions slot in.
Why is graphite so dominant?
It works well. It's relatively cheap, abundant, and has a decent capacity for storing lithium. Plus, that SEI layer we mentioned forms reasonably well on it.
But it's not the only option. The chapter mentions metal oxides, titanates like Life4T5012, LTO. Table 4.1 compares different anode materials.
Yeah, LTO is known for amazing cycle life and safety, but lower energy density. People are always looking for anodes that can store more lithium than graphite to boost battery capacity. Table 4.1 probably compares theoretical capacity, voltage, cycle life, etc.
And it also mentions alloying-type materials, like silicon.
Silicon is the big hope for next-gen anodes. It can theoretically store way more lithium than graphite, like 10 times more.
Wow, so why aren't all batteries using silicon anodes?
The problem is that silicon swells up massively when it absorbs lithium and then shrinks when it releases it. This expansion and contraction breaks the electrode apart mechanically after just a few cycles.
Ah, the volume change issue. So lots of research is focused on managing that swelling.
Exactly. Using silicon nanoparticles, mixing it with graphite, developing new binders. It's a major R&D area. Tin is another alloying material with similar potential and similar challenges.
Okay. And the chapter briefly touches on the separator and current collectors and interface chemistry.
Right. The separator is usually a thin polymer film with tiny pores, physically separating anode and cathode while letting ions through. Current collectors are the metal foils. And interface chemistry, well, that brings us back to things like the SEI and all the complex reactions happening where different components meet. It's incredibly complex at that microscopic level.
Well, that brings us through the first 4 chapters. That was quite a journey, from digging lithium out of the ground to the detailed chemistry inside a battery.
It really was. We covered resources, sustainability concerns, the fundamental science of electrochemistry and hydrometallurgy, actual production processes, and finally the key components of lithium-ion batteries themselves.
You know, reflecting on all that, the thing that really stands out is just how interconnected everything is. You can't really think about battery performance without considering the source material and the extraction method.
That's so true. The purity you can achieve from a brine versus a hard rock source might influence the final battery chemistry you can effectively use, or the cost, or the environmental footprint. It's all linked.
And for you listening, understanding these fundamentals, even at this level, gives you a much better framework for making sense of news about new battery breakthroughs or supply chain issues or the push for recycling.
Definitely. It helps you cut through the hype sometimes and understand the real challenges and opportunities. This book clearly goes much deeper in later chapters, but this is a solid start.
It really is. So maybe a final thought to leave you with. Considering this huge growing demand for lithium, especially for EVs and grid storage and everything we've just discussed about the complexities.
Where should the focus be?
Yeah. What do you think is the most critical bottleneck or the most promising area for innovation right now to ensure lithium has a sustainable future? Is it finding more resources? Developing radically new extraction techniques, making batteries last way longer, or cracking that recycling code? Something to think about.